Hello, today I'm talking to Peter Neall. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Vic.
We're both armed with a cup of tea, which is awesome.
Always good. Always good.
That's brilliant. Peter, my first question is traditional one anyway. What do you do?
Less than I did.
Good. I've never had that one before. Well done.
I'm I'm aging, and it's having strange impact on me.
Cool.
I was diagnosed a couple of years ago with Parkinson's, which was tantamount to being hit in the face by Mike Tyson.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I remember one of his famous quotes: "There's very few plans suffer a punch in the face."
yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
Parkinson's actually did that to me. And
yeah,
for a year and a half, I wandered around completely lost and ignorant and upset, thinking that my life was about to end.
mm,
And then I managed to meet a couple of people who also had it. And we found a class with a physio who knew she'd come across some people in Australia who'd actually dedicated themselves to finding a way to maximize the benefits of Parkinson's. And so Parkinson's has become my latest pilgrimage in a way that I'd never expected.
right.
Uh, and when I say my latest pilgrimage, every few years, I found myself doing a journey that was quite important to me. One of those was a cycle ride from Land's End to John O'Groats. One of those was the Camino to Santiago. And every so often, I just sort of get on my kit and head off. And my wife said to me, "You know what?" She said, "This is your latest pilgrimage." And I didn't want to believe her, but I have a nasty feeling she might be right,
Mm,
as she so often is.
mm,
And so I'm in that place where I've discovered that the more exercise I do, the better off I am.
yeah,
But if I want to, I could spend all day doing exercises that are listed on the internet or listed with various teachers as being good for me. And I could get up, do my exercises, and go back to bed at the end of the day having done nothing else.
yes,
And
yes.
that's not a good way to go, really.
No, that's
So,
interesting. Mm,
and everybody who suggests you do something, and I found this with lots of teachers through my life right the way through, is they focus on their thing
yeah,
and they completely forget to focus on the rest.
mm,
So Parkinson's people will talk to you about Parkinson's. Religious people will talk to you about religion. Literary people will talk to you about books, and so on and so on and so on.
exactly. Yes.
And I'd like to say I was a polymath, but I'm not, but I'm a poly something.
Mm,
And I get interested in things and I run them for a few years, and then either I stop getting interested in them or something else comes along that takes me and I do that.
yes.
And every so often there's a few things that just seem to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. And one of those is pilgrimage. And I don't really understand it because I dropped Christianity a number of years ago because I couldn't stand the lies.
Yeah.
I had a very Presbyterian upbringing, and the more I reflect on it, the more damaging it was.
Mm,
It reminds me a bit of Mrs. Thatcher's premiership, where all the illusion were that she was doing good, and the more you look at the results of what she did, the more horrified you are.
yes.
And I keep meeting people who say she was the best prime minister we ever had, and I said, "Don't you ever look at evidence?"
No, no.
Um,
This is fascinating, actually, because you've hit so many nails on the head. It's amazing. Um,
And
Saturn
I'm a
was,
bloody awful carpenter, and I bang my thumb a lot when I've got a hammer in my hand.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, because again, it's very interesting. It's about this the headline.
mm,
What this is, how it's particularly with politics, how things are encapsulated in a little headline thing. But you see this all the time with advertising anyway, don't you? And it's just a nice little soundbite. But then when
mm,
you sort of dig down, you go, hang on a minute.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. What's the effect? Now, the interesting thing about this, going back to the thing about pilgrimage, because this is how we obviously got introduced to one another via a mutual friend. Um, it's almost like the opposite. It's
mm,
like when you look at the sort of idea of walking somewhere or traveling somewhere that has um, a physical direction and journey. What you don't realize is that the implications of that and the effects of that are not just the fact that you've walked a long way or traveled a long way on a bike or whatever. There's this extraordinary depth of experience and outcome that you would never really, well, you would never know that that was going to happen. It's only in reflection that you start to see things.
well, the danger of any um, pilgrimage or any objective, and I came across it recently when I met a new what do they call it? A personal coach. Is she said, I need to meet you first. She said, I need to work out what your goals are. And I said, we're not going to have a good conversation. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, wait till we meet. And then when we met, she said, oh, I want to know what your goals are. I said, I don't have any. She said, what do you mean you've got to have goals?
Yeah,
I said, well, I said, tell me what happens when you hit a goal. She said, oh, it's really good. I said, no, I said, don't tell me what you feel. I said, I'm not interested in what you feel. I said, tell me what happens when you hit a goal or one of your clients hits a goal. And it took her a while. And then finally she said, they stop. I said, that's not helpful.
yeah,
I said, because if I suddenly weigh, a kilo or two less, or if I suddenly lift a kilo or two more, or if I suddenly walk to Santiago, if I get to Santiago and I'm finished, what was the point of that?
exactly.
And I remember I was a hospitalero on the Camino for 2 or 3 years, where I went to a British-run refugio, they called them, and hosted people. And instead of me doing the walking, the other people did the walking, and they brought the pilgrimage to me and then carried it on to Santiago. And they divided into two very clear um, groups. One were completely and utterly focused on the destination and almost didn't know where they were. It was a bit like I'm on day 42 of 60, or I'm on day 12 of 14, or whatever it happened to be. And then the others who were absolutely, completely in it and were present. So in the conversation with my fitness coach, I said to her, I don't want goals. What I want is a direction.
Mm,
And
exactly.
I said, if that direction works, then the destinations will take care of themselves. I said, if the destination becomes the objective, then I might just as well just catch a plane.
Mm, exactly. Directionality is the thing, isn't it?
I
It's
think so.
getting that journey that you're heading this way
Mm,
without it being that you're arriving at a particular point, because otherwise, as you say, you get fixated on that end point and
mm,
you miss all the things that you could be observing and learning
mm,
in the moment.
mm,
um, Now, from you see, I think this relates directly to the creative process about making something, or being, in my case, being involved in music that you can get so fixated on trying to get the thing right, you actually
mm,
don't actually learn anything about the piece of music itself and what the piece of music actually is telling you.
mm.
And it takes a long time to realize that. You can be told it, but you have to learn it.
Yeah,
You have to learn that
you have to find
experience.
it. Yeah.
Yes.
And for me, one of the most important things is simplicity.
Yeah.
Um, the thing I liked about all of my journeys is I got up and I headed, in the case of Land's End to John O'Groats, north. And that was all I had to do. It
Mm,
didn't matter whether I went a long way or a short way. I just got up
mm,
and headed north.
mm,
With Santiago, I got up and headed west.
mm,
And just that process. And it reminded me of Obama when he said, when I became president, he said, I just bought 7 suits that were exactly the same. And he said, I just got up and put my suit on. He said, because I don't have time to decide what I'm going to wear. And I think being an artist is a bit, and being a scientist as well, and they're often not mixed together, is your job is to make it simple.
yes.
And when people make it simple, there's a danger of understanding.
Mm,
And when people don't, there's a danger of, well, what's this about? Is this what's going on here?
mm,
And for me, simplicity has become one of my values over the years.
mm,
It didn't start out like that. It had a lot of crap cut away from it first before I
mm,
discovered it hiding underneath.
mm.
And I don't claim to be an artist. I write poetry that's probably pretty bad. I don't mostly don't sort of inflict it on others. But I like the attempt to try and capture something. And I find invariably I'm cutting out more words than I'm putting in.
Yes. Yeah. That is, yeah, that is definitely what you, I, I encourage children to write lyrics and
Good.
songs and stuff using
Yeah.
different techniques that are sort of lateral thinking. And one of the things that you you need to do with that sort of stuff is just to say, right, okay, you got a line, take a word away,
Mm,
take some words away. Does it make it better, or is it just the same, or is it worse?
mhm,
And if it's either the first two, then do that.
mm,
Only when you take something away and it doesn't doesn't just makes it less powerful,
mm,
then if it can withstand editing and cutting back, then do that.
mm,
Um, and the same goes with music. If you can play something with less notes, then you should do that because
mm.
that's not how the intellect expresses itself in anything because it just wants to be more complicated and more clever.
Well, so many of our teaching is you've got to write so many paragraphs, or you've got to fill in so many words, or if it's not if it's not a 3 page essay, it's not a proper essay. If it's not a
It's,
50 page book, it's not a
yeah,
proper book.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Instead
yeah,
of what needs to be said here.
yes, yes. Well, I wrote a book about creativity, which is actually like a demonstration of creativity, even the structure of the book.
Mhm,
And one of the things that I knew I was going to have a problem with is the idea that you're going to the sort of principle of saying, this is what I'm going to tell you, and then you tell somebody what it is that you said you were going to tell them, and then you tell them what you actually told them.
mm.
Yeah, I just can't do that. I just want to say the thing, and that's it. Right?
There's
Make a
an
statement.
assumption, there's an arrogance in that.
Yes.
And I've been told that many times. And my profession was training people in essentially getting on with one another.
Right.
And when they say you tell them, and then you tell them what it is you've told them, and then you tell them it's a bit like, so you're assuming that you're not going to be listened to.
Yes, exactly.
or you're
Exactly.
assuming that the people can't listen to you,
Yeah.
rather
And they
than
don't
saying,
understand that you've just
here it
told them
is.
something.
Yeah. And it's like that wonderful phrase in the parables, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we live in a society that doesn't have ears to hear.
No. No. Interesting point. So when did you get involved in let's just say loosely doing a pilgrimage? When did you first noticeably
I, I
do a
didn't
pilgrimage?
I didn't know it was a pilgrim. When I was a kid, I think I was 14. A friend and I might have been 15. A friend and I walked for 10 days from youth hostel to youth hostel. And then we did it again the next year, and then we did it again the next year. And we were both schoolboy athletes at the time, and we were arrogant enough to assume that a walk wasn't enough. So we'd walk for a day between two youth hostels, and then when we get to our destination hostel, we'd then go out for a run
Yeah. Yeah.
in the inimitable way that kids do.
Yeah.
And if you'd said to me I was going on pilgrimage, I would have said, "Oh no, 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 no! You don't do that. We're just walking. We're just finding out
Yeah.
about the country we live in." The more I look back, the more it was touching on things that were really important that actually carried through my life, which
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware that I was doing.
Yeah.
And then at A level, I had the pleasure or pain of doing Chaucer, depending on what mood you're in or which story you get.
Yeah.
And I didn't get one of the interesting ones. I got the Franklin's Tale, which is a load of self-righteous cobblers nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, literature and all that. But the process of the beginning of the prologue, where it says, in April, young men's fancies turn to pilgrimage. They actually don't. What they turn to is going outside and seeing who's out there and seeing whether there's any connection with them. And the
Mm.
excuse they have is pilgrimage
Yeah. Exactly.
because they were allowed to do that, whereas most of the time they were supposed to be working or doing something proper.
Yeah.
And I think for me, pilgrimage has become more and more about going out, and you go out from somewhere you feel safe, and you go out from somewhere you feel secure, and you go out from somewhere where you know exactly what's going to happen. It's 10:05, and at 55 minutes we're going to get a cup of coffee because we always get a cup of coffee at 11.
Yeah.
And you walk, and you don't know whether around the next corner is a giant, or whether there's a hole, or whether there's a lake, or whether there's a whatever.
Mm.
And the pilgrimage is you go out and you dare to see what's there. And in that sense, my first formal pilgrimage was when I was I was a marathon runner when I was younger, and did what all marathon runners do, which is I wore out my knees. I got to the point where I could barely move.
Mm.
And I got to the point where I was in so much pain that I would only go upstairs if I had at least three reasons to go. Any one wasn't enough on its own. And I had my knees repaired, two false knees. And I read David Lodge's Therapy. And it describes the story of a middle-aged woman. She became middle-aged during the story, who heard about the Camino and decided to do it. And the man who was desperate to sort of become her lover followed her. So one was actually doing the pilgrimage and one was chasing his desired woman. They're perfectly legitimate, both of them.
Mm.
And I'd never heard of the Camino before. And I just said, I'd like to do that.
Mm.
And I didn't dare dream that I could. And then my wife said to me, why don't you try it? She said, the worst that will happen is you'll find you can't.
Mm.
And that had never occurred to me. And so I formally set off, inverted commas, on pilgrimage. And it was exactly that process of going out. And I went out to a country I knew relatively little about, to a place where I didn't have the language, to a place where there was a nominal destination, and just got completely sucked into the process.
Mm.
And on the way, met all sorts of weird and wonderful people that normally I would never have spoken to.
mm,
I found out things that I really loved that I hadn't admitted that I loved. In one memorable night in the middle of Spain, I went out for a walk and somebody said to me, "Will you pop into the shop and get?" I've no idea what it was. And I passed the television on the way, and Liverpool were playing PSV Eindhoven in the European Cup,
all right.
and Liverpool is my team. And
Mm,
I'd been out of football for the process of the pilgrimage, and I stood for the whole of the thing. And then I realised that if I stayed watching and watched the end of the match, the doors would be locked, and I had to choose whether I slept or whether I found out the result. And it's an interesting decision
yeah.
because it's like you can live without this. This isn't important. This is just something that goes on behind you. Or maybe it touches something of you that you don't
Mm,
understand. What is it that it touches? And I'd never
mm,
expected to even come across it. Just didn't occur
mm,
to me.
yeah.
And there it was presented to me. And I'm not going to spoil the story by telling you what I decided, but it was just interesting that that decision never occurred at home because it was just there on the television or there on the
Mm,
radio or there in the ground or whatever it was. And there was no choice to be made. On pilgrimage, there was a choice to be made. It's like, is this part of you or is this not? What will you choose?
mm, mm,
And it goes back to that wonderful Joshua question that I learned about when I was young. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Yeah. What is it you do actually serve?
mm.
And sometimes it's just the going out.
Yeah, it is. That's interesting. I, that sort of disconnecting to things that are just, like you say, automatic. You don't even have to think about that because this is
Mm,
going to happen, type of thing.
mm,
And, it's all part of the habit of life that we have in a very sort of comfortable situation. And then going into a situation where that changes.
mm,
And, and I think the process of breaking habits and patterns and things are good in a short period of time, so that when you come back to them, you can see things that you'd not seen within those
mm.
patterns. Um, and we don't do a lot of that, shaking the system up, do we?
Well, there's something about a habit that is not chosen.
Mm,
You've fallen into, you get up each morning at whatever o'clock your parents probably taught you.
mm,
And you can hear by the way that people talk whether they were early risers or not.
mm,
And I can remember I went on a journey in 1981 where I decided to just go across to wherever, go to Dover, catch the first boat to wherever it was going, whether it was Belgium or whether it's France, and then just hitch. And when anybody stopped, say, "Where are you going?" And wherever they said they were going, say yes, and see where I ended up. And normally there's a preoccupation with when you hitch, it's like I'm wanting to get from A to B.
yeah,
But this time it was like I didn't have an A to B to get to it, just unfurled until I got close to, I was in just to the north of Milan and I thought, oh, I must be destined for Rome. I've got to go to Rome. So I tried to get to Rome and I stood on this huge roundabout just outside Milan where there was a choice of roads. Everybody that stopped was going to Venice. After the fifth car going to Venice, I decided that maybe I should be going to Venice. But it took me five cars to learn it. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm not a fast learner in that sense. And I ended up in Venice where I met somebody who I would never have spoken to, and we ended up heading off for Zagreb and places that I weren't even
yeah,
on my register,
yeah,
instead of the tick box of, well, Rome is the place where everybody goes to.
yeah, yeah.
And there's something about shaking that process up. And unless habits become choices, they're not worth having.
No,
So
that's right.
you choose to get up at that time, or you choose to have that for breakfast, or you choose to do that for your exercise, or you choose to. And at the moment they revert back to just habits, there's a point where they need to be rechosen.
Yeah.
Because I think creativity doesn't come out of habit.
No, 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 it doesn't. In actual fact, it tends to come out of breaking a habit.
Yeah. Well, either breaking the habit or choosing the habit. There's a point where
Yeah,
you have to say, this is mine.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and there are so many things that I mean, I'm told so often that I should be proud of being English. It's like, why? It was a biological accident. And it's like, what is there about English that's worth being proud of? And then do I choose that? In which case it becomes my country. Or do I go, well, maybe not,
Mm.
in which case it doesn't.
See, that's very similar to that conversation you had with that um, the trainer who said, "What are your goals?"
Mm,
Because again, a lot of these things are coming from an intellectual perspective. It's not coming from what you feel inside yourself necessarily.
mm,
Um, uh, and in a way, you could view those things as habits. You know, I want to, I want to, whatever it is, lift more weights, or I want to run faster, or I want to lose this amount of weight, or I want to,
mm,
put this amount of weight on, whatever. They're all coming out of a habit of what we perceive as being desirable in some sort of shape or form. Um, it's not necessarily coming from an unconscious um, directionality. So, what I
mm,
mean by that is, like you're saying about going to Venice,
mm,
you could argue that unconsciously you knew that's where you were going.
mm,
You certainly didn't know that consciously,
mm,
but the fact that you meet somebody that, and I've often experienced this where something happens which makes sense of something that I'd been thinking
mm,
previously, but I just hadn't arrived there intellectually. It took chance to make that present itself. And one of the interesting things about doing this podcast and interviewing lots of people, this sort of chance meeting thing that becomes an important trigger moment, like a sliding doors moment in somebody's life. It's always this, well, I had this peculiar, I met this person just by chance. And I hadn't seen this person for X, and I bumped into him in the middle of the street in London, and they
mm,
don't live in London.
mm,
And to them, it's just a chance, just coincidence.
mm,
But when you interview lots of people, and they all say this, and all say that, many of them say this,
mm,
that these pivotal moments are chance meetings, that they just look at as coincidence. When you step back and look at that, and you think, well, this is weird. That these pivotal moments are often uh, they're often chance meetings.
mm,
Um, and across the board, then you start to see that there is a pattern
mm,
of these sort of so-called coincidences that lead you there. Now, whether that is just, the unconscious, you're being drawn to situations, a bit like the sort of quantum theory thing of the past, sorry, the future drawing the past towards itself type of thing.
mm,
Um, so I think this thing of, like you're saying, of like you did about, I don't know where I'm going. It's dependent on where the person who picks me up on, as a hitchhiker is going.
mm,
That's the adventure.
mm,
I think that's fascinating.
mm.
Cool. You've done a lot of things, haven't you? Because John sort of
Yeah,
our friend John had said that you'd he'd you'd met him where?
I met him. I met him years ago at a men's workshop with Robert Bly, and
Right.
there were a number of them. I can't remember which one I met him first on, whether it was Robert Bly or Malidoma Somé or Martin Prechtel, but people of that
Yeah.
stature
Yeah.
who had something to teach, and it was quite
Yeah.
interesting because they were a group of men getting together, curious to know what manhood actually meant,
Yeah.
because it's one of those things that we actually don't know how to do it anymore.
No.
And the collapse of, for want of a better term, traditional societies, and particularly in the UK,
Mm.
we got sort of locked into a artificial way of being that was very stylized, but didn't allow for that fierceness. And my wife ended up writing a book on boys. When we had our first child, we had a boy, and she was shocked that he was so energetic and so. I think the word that Robert Bly would have used would have been fierce.
Mm.
He had a fierceness to him. Um, and so often in our culture, we've taken fierceness to be regarded as violent.
Yeah.
And yet, the people who are most violent, in my experience, are actually the women,
Mm.
where I've noticed how often, when something's said that they disagree with, they will automatically hit out.
Well, there was an incident with Robert Bly about that, wasn't there?
I don't remember.
There was I can't remember the name of the woman. But this, of course, was the if you look at the period of time that Robert Bly was obviously written Iron John, I
Mhm.
think it was probably before Iron, maybe just
That
after
was
Iron
the
John came out.
80s. Yeah.
Yeah,
It'd have been late 70s, early 80s, I think, Iron John, maybe a bit later than that. But he would have been doing the work in the 80s and 90s.
yeah.
And he was a
But there was
public,
some,
he's a
there
public
was some,
figure.
yeah, there was some stuff with some women's groups where they were trying, they were some sort of joint sort of gatherings and stuff like
Mm, mm,
conferences and stuff like that. I got a feeling one of them there was a video of one of these things, and of course, as soon as Robert was talking about that, you use the word fierceness and or
mm,
the the masculine aspect of of the story. Then there was I can't remember the name of the woman who sort of attacked him over this, about all the problems of the world are caused by men, and it was that type of thing.
mm,
And you think, well, no, it's culture,
mm.
um, and it's not one aspect, is it? It's lots of
Not at all.
you know
But it's that
aspects.
ability to, if you think of the things that draw you in and transform who you are and maybe how the world is, whether it's through poetry or through science or through music or through whatever. Imagine the Rolling Stones without fierceness.
Yeah,
Wouldn't work.
no,
Yeah.
no, I know.
And
Actually, just
imagine,
reminds me. It reminds me of something that a friend of mine who was a bass player. He was a very unusual guy, this chap, and he said we were talking about the first records we ever bought.
okay.
And he was a little bit older than me, and I think I think I bought it was either a Roxy Music single or Slade or something like that.
Oh, you're a
And
youngster then.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But
Mine
he
was
was saying no,
mine
his
wa-
one
mi- mine was
was
Buddy Holly.
no, yeah. So it's no, I'm not as old as that. He bought a Stones single, and I think it
Yeah,
might have been "Get Off My Cloud" or something like that.
yeah, okay.
But it was what he said. He said, "I love the Stones. They make me want to go home and smash up all the furniture."
That was the Who.
No, no, this was the Stones. This is what he said about the Stones. No, 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 that would have been smashing up his guitar.
Yeah.
Um, but it was that I really understood what he meant about
Mm,
that. Not
mm,
from the not a point of violence, but it's that sort of thing that it was so energetic.
mm, mm.
Um, that was the sort of way he expressed it, and I thought that was quite interesting.
But my basketball coach when I was a child at school was a PE teacher from a neighbouring school who was as bald as a coot. And when he would come along, he would bring his two kids with him, and they would make up the teams if you needed them to. One was called Mick and one was called Chris, and his
Right,
he was Mr. Jagger.
right,
And they played the way they play music, you know,
yeah,
absolutely flat out, full 100% energy, like why isn't the ball here now?
yeah, 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 yeah.
And of course, we didn't know we were playing with Mick Jagger. We were just
No,
playing basketball.
yeah,
Because if we'd known, we would have recorded it and taken some pictures and had the memories, and been famous
yeah,
with him, but we didn't. But it's that process of that fierceness. When you see somebody play their game
yeah,
with whatever energy they have and they put it to the winning of the game and the whatever it is, and not the stopping of somebody else. Because what we've got used to so often is that we try and stop somebody else rather than actually express ourselves fully.
yes, yes. That's a very good point.
And for my sins, I'm a Liverpool supporter. I became a Liverpool supporter quite by accident. I was studying in Liverpool, and one day we didn't have anything to do in the thing, and we just heard there was a football game on, so we went to whichever stadium it was, and it happened to be Anfield, thank God. And I was gifted so much by that relationship. But the process was you could see players. There were players who actually went 100% for what they could do as best they could,
Yeah,
and the players who tried to stop. And the players who went for the best that they could do would be people like Kenny Dalglish and
yeah.
Suarez.
I thought you were going to say Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah, well, at one level you can't not, and he's one of my heroes because when I look at the way he dealt with things like Hillsborough and Haysel, which nobody should have to deal with, and the dignity with which he dealt with that, with no education at all, and the soul of the man just shone through. You will do what you can. And he had an argument with some players. He was manager at the time of Hillsborough, and he just said, "You will go to the funerals." And one of them said, "I don't like going to funerals." And he said, "That's not your problem." He said, "They've had, they've lost their family. You go to the funeral. That's all you can do."
Yeah,
And he changed the relationship in many ways of the town and the place to the club.
mm,
And they became family in a way that they hadn't before
mm,
because of his soul.
mm,
And it's not something you talk about. It's not common, but everybody in Liverpool knows it.
mm.
And when the contrary came with the way the Sun behaved, they just said, "We're not buying the Sun anymore," and they still don't.
No,
It's a bit like, if your values are such that you'll sell your soul for a good story, or
yeah,
even worse, a bad story,
yeah,
we're not paying, and they don't, and they
yeah,
still don't. And there's a dignity there because that fierceness links to being a warrior. And a warrior isn't about fighting. A warrior is about protecting what's important.
yeah,
Yeah, and in my understanding of traditional societies is that the warriors were the youngsters who were growing into knowing how important their community was, and it was their job to defend it.
mm,
And they defended it with what they could and what they needed to.
mm.
And we don't do that anymore.
No, no. And interestingly, of course, the people who were warriors end up being the people who are the peacemakers as they go
because
on.
they know what it is they lose.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the brave people like Putin send them out to war with no idea of what's required.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I could name a lot. Yeah. But it's one of the things that attracts me to Liverpool as a club is that there is a relationship. And Klopp expressed it really well, where he said, you know, there are the team on the pitch and there's the team around them, and then there's the team around them. And the team around them are the supporters. And he said, and then there's all the people around the world that would love to be in the ground supporting who can't be there. But we're all part of a continuum and we're all part of that same family. And when you are, you get it. You know, I've worn
Mm.
my Liverpool scarf in all sorts of weird and wonderful places, and I never get any insults. I've had
No.
lots of conversations and lots of agreements and lots of thumbs up and lots of smiles and lots of "you'll never walk alone."
Mm.
And there's something transcendent that is quite unusual, that is not something we talk about very much. But it turns Anfield into a cathedral.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say there's a community thing going on there, isn't
Yeah, yeah,
there? And that would have been the case, I think, in a lot of places that had football.
mm,
If you went back far enough, it would have been part and parcel of what made a community.
mm.
Um, that's interesting, that, isn't it? And again, that might have been the way that that sort of masculine energy was focused.
Well, if you look at things like the various folk games, you know, the ball that was thrown in the middle of somewhere, and then they tried to get it to one end of the town or the other. Yeah, and there's still a few towns that have these games
Mm.
where the men just all rocked up on Easter Saturday or whatever day it happened to be, and you know, somebody threw the ball and off they went.
Yeah.
And there was, but with all true sport, there's one of the concepts that always fascinates me is the divine enemy. Yeah. Who's the divine enemy that if you're going to play them, you have to be on top of your game, because if you don't, they'll murder you. And
Yeah.
they also know that if they're not on the top of their game, you'll murder them.
Mm.
And there's a delicious respect. And it's not the sarcasm and it's not the blame.
No.
It's you respect an opponent who's big enough to fight you.
Yes.
And Muhammad Ali knew this,
Yeah.
you know, and I think the a lot of boxers know it,
Yeah.
and a lot of lesser sportsmen don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there is always that thing of people underestimating their opponent,
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
which that comes from some sort of um, attitude,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
probably.
one of my early heroes was Emil Zatopek,
Yeah.
and one of the things that he used to do, and nobody understood him, he would say before they started, he'd say, "Gentlemen, today we die a little," but he would also say, "Good luck" to each of the people in the particular final that he was running in their own language.
Um,
And there was one famous race where the German traditionally went out into the lead and was always overtaken on the last lap because he didn't have a great sprint.
yeah.
And he'd run himself out by leading for the 12 laps before the finish.
Yeah.
And Zatopek said to him, "Look, why don't we share the race? Why don't we share the lead? I'll take one lap, you take one lap, I'll take one lap, you take one lap. And then at lap number 10, we decide best man for themselves." The German couldn't do it. Zatopek tried 3 times to do his share. 3 times the German wouldn't let him. So finally, Zatopek did what he always did, went to the back of the field and waited till it was time to do the sprint for home. And what he wanted more than anything was a good race.
Mm.
He said that, you know, his famous race where he got his third of his 3 gold medals in 1952 at the Olympics, he said he was leading with 200 yards to go. With 150 yards to go, he was fourth. By the time it got to the tape, he'd won. And he said, I never expected to win this. He said, when they all came past me at 200 yards, he thought, this is it. There's no way I can win this. And yet he did. And that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was actually, what do you do to your absolute best? And you just throw your best in.
Mm. Again, that's very, very similar, isn't it, to going back to the idea of a pilgrimage.
Mm.
It's not a case of winning a race.
No.
It's not even necessarily a case of getting to the end. It's a case of just doing the best you can in that moment.
Mm.
You must have had a lot of situations where you think, oh my God, I can't put another foot in front of them. I'm shattered.
Mm.
And then suddenly that dissipates.
Mm.
And it's like you get a second wind.
Mm.
It's like, well, what's going on there?
Mm.
And it's always about being in that moment, isn't it? I think. And I think this is what's interesting. I found interesting about walking. And I've always walked.
Mm.
Um, I've always walked long distances. But this is more coming back to this now in the last few years. There is something about walking far enough so that you don't think.
Mm.
You're obviously thinking, but you're not thinking about anything in a planned sort of way.
Mm.
The thinking has become, well, sometimes you don't even think that you are thinking, and then you're thinking about something else, and it's all,
Mm.
a little bit.
Mm.
And there's something incredibly healing about that, I think.
Mm. But life at walking speed is different. Yeah, after I walked the Camino, particularly, I went out on the train and the boat, and that made much more sense to me. But when I came back, I was discombobulated by getting on a plane. Just
Yeah,
firstly, the simple procedure of getting on an aeroplane and the way we treat one another when we get on aeroplanes. It's not kind. Yeah, you look at the process that is justified by security and its various sisters, and we treat one another appallingly badly.
mm,
And then we hurl ourselves through the air in a completely unnatural process, and we land. And I think if you're not either really excited to be on a plane or really frightened, then you're not on it.
yeah,
Because to sit there drinking a gin and tonic and watching a crummy film on the screen, you're not on the plane, you're somewhere
no,
else.
you are somewhere else, exactly.
When you think there's, just a small piece of aluminium or whatever it happens to be between you and eternity, and you realize how thin that is and what little it will take to disrupt it, then you're on an airplane.
Yeah. And the other thing is, once you've done a flight, I don't know, I always feel like it takes a while for the rest of me to arrive.
Always. Yeah.
You know, there's always that sort of thing where you feel you're not quite all there at that point.
Well, if you think of the process of a journey, I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm blessed or whether I suffer, but I have three children. The nearest one lives in Portugal, the next one lives in Thailand, and the one after that lives in Tasmania. So I either have to decide to spend all of my life traveling, or I have to get on an aeroplane. And if I get on an aeroplane, it's like it's very easy to just pretend that I'm just going to see them. And I think one of the things when you do a long journey, when you get on you set out from home knowing you're going to be away a while and knowing you're going to travel a distance. What is the purpose of that journey? Is it just to see the family, or is there something else going on? that you may or may not understand.
Mm.
And as I've got old, and particularly I've got to the point where I can't deal with big airports on my own. I'm not fit enough to walk that far.
Mm.
So I need help. And then the process of, are you helped or are you just a job ticket?
Yeah.
And I found as we plan our trip and say, well, can we go? Are we still fit enough to go? Are we still able to afford it, etc., etc., etc.? What is the purpose of a journey? And we've become so blasé about journeys that we've trivialized them. In the Middle Ages, if you went anywhere, you walked, or if you were lucky, you got a horse. Yeah. But we look at the way we travel, and we'll get in a car and drive 100, 200, 300, 400 miles and not think about it.
Mm.
Yeah, you get on a plane and you travel halfway around the world and you don't think about it. And you complain if it's 2 minutes late arriving in Thailand.
Yeah.
Yeah. As if it
Yeah.
made any difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like we ask a question, what are we traveling for? Why are we traveling? What's the purpose of the journey?
Yeah.
And they're not common questions anymore.
No, they aren't. But they are really important questions, aren't they?
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Questioning again, like, what's the purpose behind this?
Mm,
Whether that's sort of the creating something. What does that tell you about yourself or about
mm.
how you interact with things? Yeah, that's cool. Well, Peter,
Because
we've been talking for about an hour.
blimey, just like that.
I know. I really enjoy doing this. It's very
Good. Yeah,
interesting.
I can see why.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's really good. So yeah, well, thanks for that. There's some amazing stuff we could have carried on chatting about all sorts of things. Because we glossed over William Bligh, our team Practel, but
Yeah.
maybe we can do something at some other time where we maybe talk about them.
Well, if you want to do another
That would be
and
wonderful.
maybe restrict it. I mean, let this one sit for a while and then just come back and do another one. I'm doing what I need to do. I'm going to see my son at Christmas in Australia and seeing my daughter on the way in Thailand. Um, and in some ways, it's like, what's that journey about again?
Mm,
Yeah, it's of course you're going to see the family as you do, and hidden in that and is something else,
yeah,
and it changes each time.
yeah,
Yeah, because if I routinize it, it won't be worth going anymore.
no, exactly.
Yeah,
Cool stuff. Very
yeah,
thought-provoking.
indeed.
Right then,
Thank
thanks,
you for the
Peter.
opportunity, Vic.
No, that was wonderful, mate. It's wonderful. We'll say goodbye now, but don't disappear. We'll say goodbye properly.
Okay,
Makes it sound like I've done some brilliant editing. All right,
go for it.
peace.
Yeah.